Duckworth was one of the people who had pioneered the techniques of instrument flying for the Army. And when World War II looked like it was going to be a threat to the United States, the Army called him back from reserves and put him in charge of the instrument flight training program at Bryan Army Airfield. At mess during breakfast in July 1943, word came that a hurricane was making landfall in Houston, and there was talk they might have to move the AT-6 training planes out of the way of the storm. Well, the British aviators who were there to receive instrument training were used to storms raking the British Isles, and they were kind of amused by the possibility these planes were so fragile they had to get them out of the way of a storm. Colonel Duckworth took offense at that and wanted to demonstrate the planes were in fact sturdy, and made a bet with the Brits that he could fly into the hurricane and come back and the plane would emerge unscathed. So he drafted a navigator who was happened to be at breakfast there by the name of Ralph O'Hare, and they took off toward Houston. The storm itself was the strongest hurricane to make landfall near Galveston in about 30 years, caused 19 fatalities, most of which died, but a couple of boats that sank. But they were heading for it rather than away from it. When they made contact with the Houston Air Traffic Control, the traffic controller told them to make sure to keep them posted as they're to position so that they'd be able to send out search and rescue when the plane disappeared. That turned out not to happen. It was a very bumpy flight, but the plane actually made it into the eye of the storm, which proved to be a fairly calm region of the storm. Flew around for a while. The storm had already made landfall, was basically over the countryside of perhaps what would now be the suburb of Katy. When they came back and landed, they were quite proud, but when the weather officer for the base, Lieutenant William Jones Burdick, heard about it, he said, "Take me back up there. I got to see what's going on with that storm." So after making the first intentional flight into a hurricane, they proceeded to make the first scientific flight into the storm. Lieutenant Burdick took careful notes, documented the change in temperature going to the eye. It was the first documented case where they demonstrated the eye was substantially warmer than the surroundings. And apparently free drinks that evening for Colonel Duckworth. They never got permission for the flight because they didn't figure they were going to get it. And a few other flyers heard about it around the Pacific Theater and flew into hurricanes and typhoons. And eventually, the next spring, the Joint Chiefs of Staff authorized official squadron to have responsibility for doing reconnaissance flights into storms. And that very year, a storm moved up the East Coast, and because they were tracking it carefully, they knew where it was going and proved the value of this for public safety as well as Army operations. So ever since then, the United States has been flying into hurricanes on purpose. As far as I know, they have not yet gotten another free drink from the British because of it.